Spring 1943. The German occupation of France is already 3 years old. In a river north of Paris, teenagers go swimming as if nothing's unusual. And they bring their cameras. Guy Trinquet was 17 years old at the time. We wanted to do something, to be active, to try in spite of everything, to participate in the future liberation. And that's it. Nobody knows about it, not even his girlfriend. Guy Trinquet is a member of a resistance network against the occupier. The only feeling we had was that they should leave as fast as possible, and that we had to do everything in our power to make sure they did. Forgotten by now was the German victory, the smiles and disarming politeness. With the domination of France by the SS in 1942, and the invasion of the Free Zone in the south, plus the persecutions, the split with the occupants is widening. I knew that I had to be careful. I was taking the tube a lot, and I wasn't standing too close to the doors. Someone could open the doors and just push you out. With the home movies and pictures found in private homes and collections, the story of the years of occupation continues, as the French and the Germans observe each other warily.
Schützenhaus ist Blasmusik mit Tanz. Da tanzt die Lieselott mit ihrem Franz. Da wird der kleine Amor.
A show for German soldiers in Paris. Since the German offensive against the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, France has become a rear base for the soldiers of the Wehrmacht. A quiet zone where soldiers are sent to rest.
Wo
wir zurückgekommen sind von
When we returned from Russia, we were sent to Saint-Brieuc. They wanted to reform our unit before leaving.
Und dann sagten dann hier die neuen.
And the new soldiers said, "When are we leaving?" Well, I told them, "You should be glad we're here." I would have liked to end the war here. They continue filming France as if they were on vacation. But as the occupation drags on, the attitude of the French is changing. In any case, there were too many of them, far too many. We saw them everywhere. Everywhere they were. There were Germans everywhere. All those boots marching non-stop. One day I crossed a convoy, and then I found myself on the sidewalk. It bothered them to see that we were not nice. If they greeted us, we didn't answer. It was as if we didn't see them. You're here? Fine. Stay there, do whatever you want, but we don't want to see you. We do our own little thing. We come, we go, and you're not there. As soon as they arrived somewhere, it was the Nazi salute. They were coming to the store and they asked me for markers, but with an air of, how do you say it? Stumm. But not in a nice way. They were not nice people. They could have been softer in the way that they bought things. They didn't like us much anyway, but they did love Paris. French behavior is full of subtlety and finesse. When we were in the metro and one of them walked in front of us, he'd say, sorry, and he went through the door politely. At home, no one did that. As for me, personally, I have sometimes thought that we behave like rednecks in France.
Wie ein Klotz in Frankreich, ja.
Die schöne, die schöne Wilde, führt immer was im Schilde, wenn's die Liebe geht. Die schöne, die Wilde.
Their standard of living, in particular, doesn't go down well. The conquerors have a favorable exchange rate in relation to the Reichsmark. Everywhere, they help themselves first.
Ja, da gab's noch viel zu essen. Ja, in der Bretagne.
There's still a lot to eat in Brittany, in the local restaurants where you could enjoy a good drink too.
Ein paar Lokale mit den und da haben wir dann noch.
And once we sang the Internationale, but we changed the words to
Die Internationale gesungen. Also,
people, eat more bananas and you will remain healthy.
Ihr bleibt gesund. Völker esst mehr Bananen und ihr bleibt gesund.
Jokes that no longer made one laugh. As shown in a film shot in secret by the Le Bihan family in Normandy. An increasing number of French people don't have enough to eat. Looting by the Germans is now affecting everyone. There was nothing in the stores, or almost nothing. They received very little stuff. There was nothing nowhere. We couldn't find anything anywhere. There was nothing to eat. No clothes, we had no shoes, no meat, no poultry, there was nothing. We were starving. Only half a pig at the butcher's for the whole week. It was the Germans who took everything. They left very little. The Germans had to be fed first. One day I was leaving work, and as I was always very hungry in those days, I saw two Germans in front of me on the sidewalk, eating a soldier's ration biscuit. I followed them and I said, look, they're eating. Eating was an obsession. And one of the soldiers threw the biscuit on the ground. And what do you think I did? Well, I picked it up, and I was ashamed. Oh, if you only knew how ashamed I felt to do this. I still think about it, because I said to myself, if they see me do that. So I removed the part with the teeth marks and I ate the biscuit. You really have to be hungry to do something like that. The Germans film such scenes and revel in the situations of dependency. Like Captain Gurka from the 23rd Infantry Regiment. In France, tens of thousands of women have affairs with the occupier. For many, it's a means of survival. They were in distress. There weren't many men, and those that were around were old. The young men had gone to the war. There were many prisoners, a lot of them. In our family, I don't know how many of them we had, 7 or 8 at least, who were all prisoners. All our men were prisoners. The terrace of the Hotel Meurice, the German High Command headquarters in Paris. This is where Heinz Lorenz, on the left, worked. The officer in charge of organizing recreation for the soldiers was enjoying life to the full. His standard of living was enviable. He was filmed with French mistresses. Easy indeed for this family man from Berlin to play the role of protector in times of trouble. Women who had children to feed and didn't have a husband anymore. The husband was a prisoner, there was no work, money was needed. For a pass. Why not? The pass. A little attention. Some assistance, some support in difficult times. Not prostitution necessarily, but one can make the most of those in charge. For most French, these affairs are unacceptable. And so believes this young woman, Geneviève Christophe, filmed in 1943 performing amateur dramatics. I thought they were hooers. There's no other word for it. And then, anyway, to get closer to the enemy like that, those people must not have loved their country. They were traitors. They were somehow taking advantage of good supplies. There was no new clothes to put on for most of us, but these ladies wore new clothes. I knew someone who lived in Rue Gambetta alongside the railway, and she saw people with packages that came from the Germans. People began hanging around with the Germans because they lacked everything. Can we really throw stones at them for doing so? When you're in such a situation, of course, once the guy is naked, in bed, well, he's a man, period. There's no mark on his cock saying he's German. There's no swastika. These are rare images from a French prison camp in Austria, Oflag 17A, filmed at the same time. They were taken without the knowledge of the German guards with a hidden camera that had been smuggled into the camp. It shows the defeated French troops of 1940 wasting their lives in a continuous and depressing cycle of religious processions and entertainment for prisoners. Uniquely, the amateur film has recorded a remarkable scene. preparations for an escape unfold before our eyes. To end their humiliation, 100 officers are digging a tunnel under the barbed wire. Among them, Jean-Kuhn Grandidier. We were wasting the best years of our lives, and for what? Because the politicians of the Third Republic had given up on us and had not been able to lead France to victory. But there was, after all, the call from General de Gaulle. That was an incentive to follow his example. We didn't escape just to go for a walk, you know. And I want to emphasize that point. We all made a commitment to take up arms against the enemy. It wasn't about going for a stroll or going to Vienna to live the good life. It was about resuming the fight against the Germans. They're only a small minority, but the French begin to reject defeat. On November the 11th, 1943, an event takes place that marks a turning point in the history of the German occupation. At Oyonnax, near the border with Switzerland, dozens of resistance fighters, the Maquisards, turn up out of the blue and under the noses of the Germans and march towards the war memorial to honor their elders of the Great War. One inhabitant, Raymond Rouleau, and his son, Pierre, films the symbol of rebirth from his window. What made the most impact were the order, discipline, and perfect organization of that day. We felt it was the beginnings of a small army. They were led by soldiers who seemed to be respected. And everything worked so well, we suddenly had the feeling that the resistance wasn't just a random group of people who lived in the woods, but that it was a real secret organization that did exist and on which we could rely. It was in reaction to the propaganda that never missed an opportunity to discredit the Maquis, the resistance fighters who were presented as terrorists, who only enjoyed stealing money or acting like gangsters. To the Germans, France had, by signing the armistice, given up on any military action. Those who take up the fight, as shown in this amateur film shot in Brittany, don't respect the laws of war. To the Germans, they are terrorists.
Partisans sind nie uniformiert.
Partisans didn't wear uniform. It was the same in Russia, Italy, and Yugoslavia. It gave them an advantage. They could come and go easily, strike out of nowhere. The word maquis in French means the shrubs. We weren't scared of the Americans, but we did fear the maquis.
Die Partisanen habe ich kein Verständnis. Die führen einen Krieg,
I couldn't accept what the partisans were doing.
in keinem Land akzeptiert wird. Ja.
The war they waged wasn't recognized by any country.
In meinem Sinne und auch im Sinne der Genfer Konvention.
In my opinion, and according to the Geneva Convention, they weren't soldiers and the laws of war didn't apply.
Angewandt, sondern
So when you shoot, you shoot. In other words,
da wird dann geschossen. Ja, das ist,
they will be annihilated.
kann man sagen, die werden vernichtet.
Nevertheless, some Germans disobey. Like Hans Heysel, who is now 23 years old and is still in the General Staff of the Navy. Thanks to meetings, including with a member of the German opposition, Hans becomes aware of the criminal policies of Nazism.
Das war ein Sozialdemokrat.
He was a social democrat, but from the left,
Dessen Brüder
and whose brothers had been arrested by the Gestapo in Wuppertal.
inhaftiert worden sind in Wuppertal. Und der mir dann
He told me
erzählt
what the
hat,
Nazis
was die
had done
Nazis
in
in
his
seinem
city.
Ort so alles gemacht haben. Sie haben
They
einen
had
Bruder
tortured
von
one of
ihm
his brothers,
gefoltert
and another was sent
und
to a
einer ist ins
concentration
KZ
camp.
gekommen. Das war für mich ganz neu, davon habe ich überhaupt keine Ahnung gehabt. Und das hat
It was
in
all very
meinem
new to me. I had no
Prozess
idea.
etwas dazu beigetragen. Ja, zu denken
And as I
darüber,
learnt about it, it made me
weshalb
ask
bin ich
myself,
denn
why am I
überhaupt
here?
hier?
What role do I
Welche
objectively
Rolle spiele
play
ich
in this war?
objektiv in diesem Krieg?
After several months of reflection, Hans Heysel secretly joins the French Communist Party, all the while remaining at his post. He also agrees to supply weapons which will likely be used to fight and kill his compatriots. As for me, I was completely opposed to the idea of taking a gun to kill a German. I was completely opposed to it. It was the communists who did this. As far as I'm concerned, it's not resistance, if I dare say. It was useless, it was very cowardly. Once a German was shot, hostages were taken, and they were shot. It served no point at all. Real resistance was to do everything each of us could in his own way. As far as the Maquis, they were the armed resistance, and by that time we were fighting. It was a real war. It was a proper war. I thought we had to free the German people from these criminals. That was the reason. I felt that if I hadn't done anything, and knowing they were criminals of the highest order, I couldn't have looked myself in the mirror. They didn't represent my country. On the contrary, they were criminals who had sullied the name of Germany throughout the world. So how should one deal with Nazi Germany? As these films from 1943 show, two minorities exist side by side, one resisting, the other collaborating. To imitate Germany to help France get back on its feet. The head of the militia is Joseph Darnan, a First World War hero and a future member of the Waffen-SS. But some followers lost their way, such as André Gimel, who filmed the ceremony in the Savoie, a home movie enthusiast. He writes in his diary, "The faces of the militiamen are severe and harsh. The martyrs of National Socialism are its strength and greatness. Their doctrine will defeat their bitterest enemies, the Jews, the communists, the black marketeers." Stuck in between are the majority of French people, torn apart and entangled in contradictions. such as the Ferré family, also in the Savoie, that films Marshal Pétain, the man who made the choice of collaboration, the one who puts his police force in the service of Jewish persecution and repression of the resistance. To many French people, especially the young Gabriel Ferré, 15 at the time, Pétain, the hero of the First World War, was the only one able to stand up to the Germans. It was a little like Joan of Arc, if you will. In my mind, anyway, as a little girl, I thought he was like Joan of Arc and all those who sacrificed themselves for France. He would probably save us, but I didn't know how. Oh, there was no doubt the Germans were our enemies. They were the hereditary enemies. They were those who had killed my uncle, those who had hurt others. Oh yes, they were our enemies. It wasn't the Germans who were going to teach us that, no. It would be national revival, as we said at the time. Either indifferent or misled by the reassuring image of Marshal Pétain, the French seem not to realize the extent of Nazi persecution. In Pithiviers, south of Paris, the Imbaud family are filming daily life without worrying too much about the fate of the Jews, who are imprisoned in a camp on the outskirts of the town. Flashback to 1940, when the base is being used by the French military. In this, the same site, thousands of Jewish people will be imprisoned, including women and children, all of them arrested during the infamous winter Velodrome roundup, before being deported to Auschwitz. We had no idea what was happening to the Jews in the camp. We lived in town. So did we have a sheltered life? I don't know. But we didn't realize what was happening around us. The Jews came to Pithiviers station and were taken by convoy directly to the camp. They weren't mistreated. They were taken in a procession, in rows, in columns to the camp. But we confined them there, and at first they were taken, escorted by gendarmes, French gendarmes. They were taken to run some errands in town. For the inhabitants to see people in town accompanied by the French gendarmes, it then seemed all right. Therefore, many people didn't ask questions. Once I asked my mother about what she knew about the camp. I think she was embarrassed because she didn't know how to answer. The only thing she told me is that occasionally, when they came to run their errands, they were throwing or leaving bits of papers behind, some of them with addresses written on it. And my parents were sending those papers off by mail. Well, that's all. I think they were fooled. They were deceived by the presence of French gendarmes. That's for sure. I felt very guilty. Very, very guilty to have lived a life. I would say that it had been relatively quiet. And then there's this huge injustice. It's horrible. When I learned little by little what had happened, the Jews being arrested at the time, I knew nothing about it. The fact that such a destructive system had been set up by men against other men. I had a certain idea of what humanity should be, but this was beyond anything. How should the French be judged 70 years later? collaborators, resistance fighters. What do the enigmatic smiles reveal? Robert Brochot lives in La Rochelle. He's a photographer. His shop was requisitioned by the Germans to develop pictures taken by their soldiers. This is a good example. Okay, well, we did collaborate. Let's tell it the way it was. Everyone collaborated. We all did. The baker collaborated, the pastry chef collaborated. We accepted them, but as customers. Not as the German army, but as clients. They were seen as customers, period. And later we talked. When we knew a little more German, we talked to them. We asked them where they came from. One of his clients was called Friedrich. We were exactly the same age, 21. He was from Frankfurt on Main, and he used to drop by the house. We closed the front door, and every evening at 8 o'clock, for the 3 months he was there, we'd listen to London, the French, speak to the French on the BBC. And he'd also listen to this. He had his own ideas about Germany, not the ideas of Heil Hitler. A simple German citizen, as they are today. In secret, in his laboratory, Robert Brochot decides to duplicate all the photos the Germans give him to develop. 700 altogether, to be used as evidence later. He was running a huge risk. What with the atrocities and the military secrets, he could have faced the death penalty. And what if this is what the French were like during the occupation? They accommodated the Germans, and at the same time resisted them too, without even realizing the contradiction. It became a kind of double thinking, a schizophrenia. Another episode from The Juror. Victor Barb, the customs officer who had filmed the arrival of the Germans in 1940, is now a translator. He's a kind of intermediary with the locals. With his wife, he spends time with them. Especially with the soldier Bauer, who he will continue to see after the war. And this doesn't prevent him from filming an anti-German scene, despite a ban. People had thrown nails on the road to puncture the tires of the Germans. The locals are requisitioned. And things turn to farce. As the nails are not swept away, but into the middle of the road. It ends with a parody of a military review, when a fake German is greeted by an army of sweepers. Warning, this is a statement from the 1st Anti-Aircraft Division of Berlin. We are informed that squadrons of bombers are flying over the region of Hanover and Braunschweig. We will keep you informed. will soon be 4 years old, and to the Germans, the allure of France is now a distant memory. I'm asking you, do you want total war? From Brittany, Klaus Kendler writes to his parents in Berlin. I'm starting to get tired. I've seen so much stuff. My best years are slipping away. I'm tired of France, except Paris. The most terrible thing is that one doesn't see an end to it. In 4 days, I will be 22. I can't believe it. Last year, I was in Russia. Now I'm in France. Next year, where will I be? I was getting older, and there was no end in sight to the war. But it was obvious it wasn't going to end well. There'd been Stalingrad and North Africa afterwards, and we thought to ourselves that it would end in a disaster. Those who still believed the war might be won were living in a fantasy world. I'd received a huge bouquet of flowers at work. And when I got out of work, not knowing who had sent me the flowers, then I saw a German uniform following behind. And I could hear the sound of his boots. The noise of his boots, it's terrible, I can still hear it. Anyway, this German followed me to the Saint-Lazare station in tears, telling me he wanted to talk to a woman before dying. He was leaving for the Russian front. So I talked to him, but rudely, because I was very cross with the Germans. I said there was nothing to eat, you have deprived us of everything. My brother was arrested by the Gestapo and so on. And then he opened his wallet and gave me all his coupons. And I left him there like that. I left him on the sidewalk, crying. He was crying. It haunts my memory. As I say, this man probably died right away because he was so afraid of dying. And maybe he was very kind. I mean, the proof is that he wanted to talk to a woman before dying. That's not malicious, is it? In 1944, France again becomes a battleground. The Allies bomb the country ferociously. In Normandy, Huguette and Jean-Yves Le Bihan, who filmed the queues in front of shops, narrowly escaped death several times. An unbelievable fear. That's what bombing is. It's awful. After, we'd say, the Americans are hitting away from high up, because they had destroyed so many houses in Évreux. There'd been a big bombardment. 220 dead. They had no choice. They had to get rid of the Germans. In that period, the Germans became so aggressive. It had to end. It couldn't last anymore, even if others had to pay the price. There weren't many other solutions to getting rid of the Germans. No, for sure. This kind of terrible war destroys so many things. Allied bombing causes 60,000 deaths, more than the German bombings in 1940. The Germans tried to take advantage by attending funerals of the victims and by being compassionate, like here in Belgium. Yet their propaganda fails to make people forget the atrocities committed by their own troops. The SS were now part of the frontline units of the Wehrmacht, and they fiercely repress the resistance fighters without sparing civilians. The last German who I spoke to was Waffen-SS. And of course, the question he asked me was if I knew where the terrorists were. They didn't call them resistance, of course. Can you imagine it, asking such a thing to a young French woman? Anyway, the Waffen-SS wouldn't stop at anything. With defeat approaching, the Germans stopped filming in France. There is no footage of the thousands of Jews who continue to be deported to the east. Very few photos of the hundreds of massacres, such as this one committed at Lantilly in Burgundy a few days before the D-Day landings. Most films from the summer of 1944 are being shot by the French to show how the Germans are treating France. At Dorton, in the Jura, Raymond Rouleau is filming a torture stake, a common grave, and the village that has been destroyed. The Germans came by road and began to massacre the population and burn villages. The villagers had fled into the forest, fearing the Germans. And the Germans organized a sweep of the forests, and they considered all the people who were outside of the village to be with the resistance. Therefore, they were deported. Some were tortured. It was very bloody. By this point, we were terrified of them. We said this couldn't be real. We couldn't understand. We'd seen men who were just like us before, and then now they were behaving like savages. Well, they felt they were going to lose the war, fine, but they were so vicious. At the time, we changed our opinion of the German army. It was no longer a splendid and well-organized force. It had turned into a kind of dubious rout, and we were dismayed to see those people behaving like brutes. But at the same time, reassured, because we thought that with these kind of people, the army wouldn't survive long. From June the 6th, 1944, the date of the Allied landings in Normandy, the struggle is reversed as the Germans, under the eyes of the French, begin their retreat. When the front collapsed in Normandy, everything happened very fast. The main units were beaten. It was a terrible retreat. But we wore the uniform, and to desert meant being put up in front of a wall, and who wanted that? We'd been given weapons, vehicles, and we were still proud of our unit, of our artillery. Before leaving, Heinz Heid has just enough time to say goodbye to his French friend, Vivian. She was at the window, and I was in the street. She didn't come out. She stayed up in the apartment. We just exchanged a few sentences. She said, "Dank an mich," which I didn't understand at first. This meant in German, "think of me," with a French accent. These are the only German words she ever said to me. Nothing spectacular, really. On one hand, we were scared. On the other hand, a beautiful friendship was coming to an end. We tried to act as normally as possible. From her window, Huguette Le Bihan films the troops pulling out. I remember the Germans were looking for any transport, even bicycles, to get away, because they were afraid the Americans were arriving. They left on whatever they could find, cars or bikes. I even saw one German on a horse, as in that movie, The Longest Day. It was pathetic. They took anything to save themselves. It was their exodus. For months, I had diarrhea. I was so scared. All these whistles in the air, the total superiority of the Americans in the sky. We just said to ourselves, how long is this going to keep on? We were almost pitying them because we were telling ourselves, look at them now. It was a hell of a difference. We were saying, you see, now it's your turn. What we said didn't hurt them, of course, just their sense of pride and the dignity of the Great Reich. And then, well, then we saw the GIs. The GIs, a completely different story. In Normandy, Huguette and Jean-Yves Le Bihan rush with their cameras to the first Americans. I asked him, where were they going? And they told me they were going towards eastern France as quickly as they could.
Quickly. Et voilà.
The story now is of a population trying to reconnect with its destiny. In Paris, without waiting for the Allies, people rise up. Among them is the German Hans Heisel. We get up in the morning, or we go out, and we see posters everywhere. French people, Parisians, take up arms. Let's release our city. It was perhaps a bit like the Great French Revolution. In the streets, there were men, women, and children who built barricades with great enthusiasm. No more German soldier dared cross the city, but there were tanks everywhere. I saw one go down one street, and the residents threw Molotov cocktails from the window and onto the roof of the tank until it caught fire.
Bis der in Flammen aufging.
The story of a humiliation, which once again changes sides. It wasn't possible to make an exit any worse than this. It was our 0 hour.
Als Verlierer
I felt like a loser.
geführt. Ja.
Yes, I had lost the war. I personally had lost the war as a prisoner.
Da in Gefangenschaft gehen mussten. Ja.
Alors ça, les prisonniers allemands, j'en ai vu.
I saw German prisoners of the Gare du Nord coming out with their hands on their heads. It was the Free French who had dislodged them, and everyone was spitting on them. They were covered in spit. It was really horrible. It shocked me terribly. I mean, despite the fact that they were our enemies then, I don't think I would have done that.
Je pense pas que j'aurais fait ça.
Did they understand what was happening to them? Not always. One of those Germans who has just been arrested is Walter Dreisner. For months, he has been taking pictures of France, as the Germans fantasized it. Apolitical and sensual. His last photos are from July 1944, taken at a swimming pool with his French friends. He wrote in his journal, "We're being pushed around by the blacks from the Leclerc division. A wave of insults rains down on us. On the Rue de Rivoli, the guy who's in front of me gets punched on the chin and falls. A French guy takes a bike and throws it at us, we who are helpless. They take it out on us, who are in many cases innocent. In Paris, no one would treat an animal like that." No, as far as I'm concerned, they're not friends. Those who fight for the Nazis are not friends. Of course, they have to be taken away. And they should be treated as criminals. They are responsible for all of this. I might be sorry for them to be captured like that, but they still have the chance to save their lives. Yes, it was very humiliating. And besides, it was understandable that we were treated that way. Even though it wasn't fair, people said Germans equal Nazis, which was not true for most of us. To see the Germans being defeated, I can assure you, was really comforting. Oh, in many ways. Oh, yes. Revenge.
La revanche, quoi.
As far as we're concerned, France was not the winner in 1945. It may have been part of the victors because she had decided to be on their side. But the war in France, it was the Americans who won it. And so ends the war. And with it, a secular hostility between France and Germany. To the joy of all those who miraculously survived Nazism, such as young Leon Sidlecki, or the Bois family, those Alsatian Jews who are coming out of hiding to welcome the Allies with their little girls, born during the German occupation. And there's bitterness as well for the French, of having to be liberated for the most part by others, and for failing to win the war, they sometimes lost their soul. Less than 5 years after the defeat of 1940, Nazism itself was defeated, and lasting peace would be established between the two countries. Who would have imagined at the time the string of humiliations would finally be forgotten 70 years later?